Good evening, and welcome to Tuck and Tales, a quiet place at the edge of the night, where the fire burns softly, where the wind moves gently through the trees, and where every story is told slowly enough to let the world grow still. Tonight, we leave the rain-soaked streets behind and travel far into the mountains, to a place where snow covers the forest, where old wooden walls creak beneath the weight of winter, and where lonely lodge waits in silence above the clouds. They say no one should visit Blackpine Lodge after sunset. They say the mountain remembers every footstep, every whispered promise, every door left open, and every name spoken in fear. And they say that once each year, just before dawn, a single candle lights itself in the highest window. Tonight's story is not a tale of loud terror. It is a quiet mystery. A story of snow, old friendships, hidden guilt, and the kind of secret that waits for years beneath the silence. So settle in now. Pull the blankets a little closer. Let your breathing become calm. Let the room around you grow soft and still. Tonight, we follow a quiet investigator named James Vale as he travels to a forgotten mountain lodge to discover what truly happened there many winters ago. This is the story of the Lodge Before Dawn. These are the stories that tuck you in. The mountain road had not been used in years. At least, that was what the driver told James Vale as the carriage climbed slowly through the dark forest. The driver was an old man named Mr. Barlow. He had a gray beard, heavy gloves, and a voice that sounded as if it had been shaped by cold weather. He did not speak often. When he did, he spoke without looking back. "Road gets worse after the bend," he said. James Vale looked through the carriage window. Outside, the world was turning white. Snow drifted between the black pine trees. It gathered on branches and softened the stones along the roadside. It buried the edges of the path until the road ahead seemed less like a road and more like the memory of one. Beyond the trees, the mountain rose into darkness. There were no village lights behind them now. No warm windows. No smoke rising from chimneys. No sound except the horses breathing, the wheels creaking, and the quiet hush of snow falling through the forest. James pulled his coat closer around him. He was not a young man, though he was not old. There were streaks of silver in his dark hair, and his eyes had the patient calm of someone who had spent many years listening to people avoid the truth. He was not a policeman, not exactly. He called himself an investigator. Others had called him a detective, a consultant, a meddler, and once or twice a ghost hunter. The last name had followed him after the Marrow House affair, though James had never liked it. He did not believe in hunting ghosts. He believed in listening to places where people claimed ghosts had appeared. That was usually where the truth was hiding. He had solved crimes in London drawing rooms, in seaside hotels, and in quiet villages, where everyone knew too much and said too little, but he had never been called to a place like Blackpine Mountain, and certainly never by a letter like the one folded in his inner pocket. "Dear Mr. Vale, I do not know whether you investigate the dead, but I hope you investigate the truth. 10 years ago, my brother vanished at Blackpine Lodge with 5 others during a winter gathering. The official explanation was that they were lost in the storm. The mountain took them, the police said. The snow covered everything, and by morning there was nothing left to find. But one thing has never made sense. Every year, on the anniversary of that night, a candle appears in the highest window of the lodge. There is no caretaker, no owner in residence, no staff, no guests. The road is closed most winters, and yet the candle burns. This year, I am going back. I have been told you are a man who listens before deciding what is possible. Please come before the snow closes the road. Yours sincerely, Clara Whitmere." James had read the letter 6 times on the train north. He had paused each time at the sentence. The mountain took them. People liked giving nature human qualities. The sea swallowed ships. The fog hid murderers. The mountain took them. But James had learned that when people blamed weather, darkness, or land itself, they were often protecting someone made of flesh and bone. The carriage turned sharply. A black shape appeared between the trees. At first, James thought it was a cliff. Then the shape grew windows, A roofline, tall chimneys, and a wide balcony. As the horses slowed beneath the falling snow, Blackpine Lodge emerged from the storm. It was larger than James had expected. Built of dark timber and stone, it stood on a rise above the forest like an old animal crouched against the weather. Its steep roof carried a heavy layer of snow. Icicles hung from the eaves. The windows were dark. No smoke rose from the chimneys, yet the building did not seem abandoned. That was the first thing James noticed. Some empty houses feel dead. Blackpine Lodge felt as though it were holding its breath. Mr. Barlow stopped the carriage before the front steps. "This is as far as I go," he said. James looked at him. "You won't wait?" "Not after sunset." "It is not yet sunset. It will be by the time you unload." James opened the carriage door. Cold air entered sharply. "How do I leave?" "If you still wish to leave tomorrow, I'll return at noon. If the road is open." The driver did not answer. James stepped down into the snow. His boots sank almost to the ankle. Mr. Barlow lifted James's suitcase from the rear of the carriage and set it beside him. Then, before climbing back onto his seat, the old driver turned. "Mr. Vale?" "Yes, if you hear someone walking upstairs tonight, do not answer when they knock." James studied him carefully. "Have you heard someone walking upstairs?" Mr. Barlow looked toward the lodge. "No. But my brother did." "When?" 10 years ago. The morning after they vanished. He was with the search party. He said someone knocked from the inside of a locked room. When they broke the door open, there was no one there." James waited. The old driver lowered his voice. "My brother never came up this road again." With that, Mr. Barlow took the reins. The carriage turned slowly and disappeared into the trees, its lanterns fading like two tired fireflies in the snow. James stood alone before Blackpine Lodge. The sky had become a deep blue-gray. Snow fell steadily. Somewhere in the forest, a branch cracked beneath the weight of ice. James took his suitcase and climbed the steps. Before he could knock, the door opened. A woman stood inside. She was perhaps 35, pale from winter travel, with dark blonde hair pinned beneath a wool scarf. She held a lantern in one hand. Her face was composed, but her eyes showed that she had not slept well for many nights. "Mr. Vale? Miss Whitmere, thank you for coming. I said I would. A rare quality, not as rare as people claim." She stepped aside. "Please come in. The fire has just been lit." James entered. Warmth touched his face. The main hall of Blackpine Lodge was grand but not cheerful. High wooden beams crossed the ceiling. A stone fireplace stood at the far end, its flames newly awakened. A staircase rose in two wings toward a shadowed upper gallery. Animal heads and old mountain photographs hung along the walls. Rugs covered the floor, dark red and worn. A chandelier of black iron hung above the center of the room. The lodge smelled of pine wood, old leather, cold ashes, and dust disturbed after a long sleep. James removed his gloves. "You came alone?" "No, my cousin Edmund is here. So is Mrs. Havel, the woman who once managed a household, and Dr. Reese, who was part of the original search." "You gathered witnesses." Clara looked toward the staircase. "I gathered survivors." The words settled between them. "Were they all here that night?" James asked. "Mrs. Havel was. Edmund was meant to be, but he never came, Doctor. Reese arrived the next morning with the search party." "And your brother?" "My brother Daniel was one of the 6 who vanished." James nodded gently. "Tell me their names." She seemed grateful that he did not immediately say he was sorry. Some grief becomes tired of polite phrases. "Daniel Whitmere, my brother. He was 24. Margaret Ellison, his fiancée. Peter Galloway, a university friend. Simon Rowe, who studied medicine. Lillian Price, a pianist. And Arthur Crane, whose family owned this lodge. All young, all between 22 and 26. A winter gathering. Yes, a reunion. They had come here often as students. Arthur invited them back for a weekend. And all 6 vanished in one night." Clara nodded. "During a storm." James looked around the hall. "From inside the lodge?" "That is what no one agrees on." Before James could reply, footsteps sounded from the side corridor. A large man in a brown jacket entered, carrying a tray with coffee cups. He had red cheeks, a nervous smile, and the look of someone trying too hard to appear relaxed. "Mr. Vale, I presume." "James Vale, Edmund Whitmere, Clara's cousin." They shook hands. Edmund's palm was warm and damp. Terrible weather, Edmund said. Simply terrible. But I suppose that is the point of a mountain mystery. Clara gave him a look. He cleared his throat. Sorry. Another figure appeared behind him. An elderly woman in black moved slowly but upright. Her silver hair was pulled severely back, and her eyes missed nothing. Mrs. Havel, Clara said. The old woman gave James a small nod. You are the investigator. I am. I hope you investigate living people first. James smiled faintly. I usually do. Good. And Dr. Reese? James asked. In the library, Edmund said. He prefers bottles to introductions. Edmund, Clara said quietly. What? It's true. James looked toward the staircase again. At the top, the upper gallery lay dark. Before I meet him, he said, I would like to know about the candle. Clara's expression changed. She motioned toward the stairs. It appears in the north tower window. Every year? Yes. At what time? Between 4 and 5 in the morning, always before dawn. Who sees it? Villagers from below. Shepherds. Once, a group of railway workers. There are records. Has anyone come up to investigate? Twice. Both times they found nothing. No footprints. No candle. No sign anyone had entered. James considered this. Snow outside. No footprints. A candle in an upper window. A locked lodge. A vanished group of friends. It was a fine stage for a ghost story. And James distrusted fine stages. Show me the tower, he said. The north tower was reached by a narrow staircase behind the upper gallery. Clara led the way with the lantern. The stairs climbed in a tight spiral. Dust lay thick along the edges, though the center had been recently disturbed. At the top was a small circular room with 4 windows. One looked north over the Black Forest. One looked east toward a frozen ravine. One looked south toward the lodge roof. One looked west, down the mountain toward the distant valley. That was the window visible from below. James approached it. The glass was old and uneven. Frost feathered the corners. On the sill stood a brass candlestick. No candle. James touched the brass lightly. Clean. Too clean. This has been polished recently, he said. Clara looked surprised. I did not polish it. Mrs. Havel? She said she has not been up here in years. Someone has. James knelt. There were faint scratches on the wooden floor beneath the sill. Not random. Repeated. As if the candlestick had been moved back and forth many times. He opened the window latch. It resisted. Frozen at the edges. No one had recently opened it. Then he looked up. Above the window, a narrow iron ventilation grill had been set into the stone. Old houses had many such features. Passages for air, smoke, speaking tubes, servants, and secrets. James made a note. When was the candle first seen? 1 year after the disappearance. Not the same night? No. And always on the anniversary? Yes. Tonight is the anniversary. Clara looked at him. Yes. Outside, the snow thickened. The forest below had nearly vanished. James turned from the window. Then I suppose we should expect a light before morning. Clara's face tightened. That is why I asked you to come. As they descended the tower stairs, James heard something below. A door closing softly, too softly. He paused. Clara looked back. What is it? Someone does not like us visiting the tower. Dinner was served in the long dining room at 8. The room was cold despite the fire. Portraits of stern mountain families watched from the walls. Candles burned in silver holders along the table. Wind pressed snow against the dark windows. There were 5 people at dinner. Clara Whitmere, Edmund Whitmere, Mrs. Havel, Dr. Nathaniel Reese, and James Vale. Dr. Reese was a thin man with gray hair, a narrow face, and hands that shook when he lifted his glass. He had the weary dignity of a man who had once been respected and had not adjusted well to becoming pitied. You have come to solve the unsolvable, he said to James. I try not to call things unsolvable before dessert. Edmund laughed too loudly. Mrs. Havel did not. Clara ate very little. James watched all of them. People at dinner reveal more than people under questioning. Clara kept looking toward the windows. Edmund spoke whenever silence became uncomfortable. Mrs. Havel cut her food into exact pieces, but barely ate. Dr. Reese drank more than he should, and looked repeatedly at the empty chair opposite him. James noticed the chair. Was someone meant to join us? The table grew quiet. Mrs. Havel said no, but she answered too quickly. James turned to Clara. That was Daniel's chair, she said. Edmund shifted. Not literally. We all sat wherever we liked back then. No, Mrs. Havel said. That was Mr. Daniel's chair. Dr. Reese stared into his glass. James set down his fork. Tell me about the night they vanished. No one spoke. The fire moved softly. At last, Mrs. Havel said. They arrived laughing. She looked not at James, but at the table, as if the younger versions of them might still be seated there. There had been snow all afternoon. Mr. Daniel brought Miss Margaret. Mr. Arthur brought wine. Mr. Peter brought a camera and would not stop taking photographs. Miss Lillian played the piano after supper. Mr. Simon complained of the cold. James listened. They were happy? He asked. Mrs. Havel paused. They were young. It is not always the same thing. Clara looked at her sharply. What does that mean? The old housekeeper folded her hands. There had been arguments. What arguments? Mrs. Havel looked to Dr. Reese. The doctor said nothing. James followed the glance. You know, James said. Dr. Reese sighed. I know only what was reported. Then report it. Dr. Reese drank. They were planning an engagement announcement. Daniel and Margaret. But Arthur Crane was unhappy about it. Why? Because he loved Margaret. Clara stared at him. No one told me that. You were 14, Edmund said softly. I was old enough to be told the truth. Mrs. Havel's face did not change. James turned to her. What happened after supper? They drank. They played cards. Miss Lillian played piano. Around 11, the storm worsened. The telephone line failed. I went to bed shortly after midnight. Leaving the 6 downstairs? Yes. What did you hear? Mrs. Havel's eyes lowered. At some hour, I woke to shouting. Words? No, only voices. Men? Women both. Then, a scream. Clara inhaled. Mrs. Havel continued. I came downstairs. The hall was empty. The front door was open. Snow had blown inside. I saw footprints leading out. How many sets? I do not know. The storm was too heavy. Did you follow? I was an old woman even then, Mr. Vale, and the snow was blinding. You called for help? The telephone was dead. I waited until morning. Then I sent the stable boy down the mountain. James looked at Edmund. You were not here? No. Why? Edmund's face reddened. I missed the train. Convenient. Not at the time. Were you invited? Yes. By whom? Edmund hesitated. Daniel. Clara frowned. I thought Arthur invited everyone. Daniel wrote separately. Why? Edmund looked away. I don't know. James let the silence linger. Then he turned to Dr. Reese. You arrived with the search party. At dawn. What did you find? Nothing useful. Footprints vanished beyond the tree line. Snow had covered most of them by then. We searched toward the ravine, the old mine road, and the east ridge. Bodies? None. Blood? None. Clothing? One scarf. Belonged to Margaret Ellison. Found near the tree line. Clara's voice was tight. You never told me that. Dr. Reese looked at her with tired eyes. I was not the one who decided what your family should know. James glanced at Mrs. Havel. She looked down. And the candle? James asked. Dr. Reese lifted his glass again. That appeared the following year. Superstitious nonsense. You came here to investigate it? Once. What did you find? Nothing. Where did you look? The tower. The hall. The exterior. Did you look in the wall? Dr. Reese stopped moving. It was small, but James saw it. No, the doctor said. Why would we? Old houses hide things. Mrs. Havel said quietly. This one hides more than most. The wind struck the windows hard enough to make the candles flicker. For a moment, every person at the table looked toward the glass. Outside, snow swirled in the dark. Then, from somewhere above them, came a sound. One knock, slow, wood against wood. The dining room froze. A second knock followed. Then a third. Clara's face went pale. Edmund whispered. That came from upstairs. James stood. Which room? Mrs. Havel did not look at him. The old nursery. There are no children here, James said. No, she replied. Not anymore. The old nursery was at the east end of the upper floor. The corridor leading to it was narrow and colder than the rest of the lodge. Dust lay along the skirting boards. Several doors stood closed. At the far end, moonlight shone faintly through a small window. James walked ahead with a candle. Clara followed. Edmund came behind her, unwilling to be left downstairs. Mrs. Havel walked slowly, one hand on the wall. Dr. Reese remained in the dining room. The nursery door was locked. James looked at Mrs. Havel. Who has the key? I do. May I have it? She reached into a ring of keys at her waist and selected one. James took it and studied her face. Did you lock this door? Yes. When? 10 years ago. And it has not been opened since? Not by me. James inserted the key. It turned stiffly. He opened the door. The room beyond was dark. The candlelight entered first. The nursery was small, with a sloped ceiling and faded wallpaper patterned with birds and branches. A child's bed stood against one wall. A rocking horse faced the window. A wooden toy chest sat beneath a shelf of old books. And in the center of the floor stood a chair. It had been placed facing the door. On the chair lay a folded piece of paper. Clara whispered, "That was not there before." James stepped into the room. Dust covered much of the floor, but near the chair were marks. Footprints. Recent. Not large. Not heavy. A woman's boots, perhaps. Or a slight man's. James picked up the paper. It was a page torn from a notebook. One sentence had been written across it. "Ask why Daniel came early." Clara stared at it. "He came early?" Edmund said, "No. We all came the same day." Mrs. Havel's eyes had changed. James noticed. "You knew," he said. She swallowed. "Daniel arrived the night before the others." Clara turned on her. "What?" "He asked me not to tell anyone." "Why?" Mrs. Havel looked at the note. "Because he came to meet Arthur privately." James folded the paper. "And what did they discuss?" "I do not know. That is not quite true." The old woman's chin lifted. "I heard only part of it. Tell us that part." Mrs. Havel looked at Clara. "Your brother wanted Arthur to confess something." "Confess what?" "I never heard. Arthur shouted that it was buried and should remain buried. Daniel said if Arthur would not tell the others, he would." James looked down at the footprints, and the next night, all 6 vanished. No one spoke. Outside, the wind moved around the lodge like a living thing. Then, very slowly, the rocking horse began to move. Back, forward, back, forward. Edmund made a strangled sound. Clara stepped back. James did not move. He watched the floor. The rocking horse creaked softly. Back, forward, back, forward. Then it stopped. James crossed the room and crouched beside it. A thin black thread ran from the underside of the horse toward the wall, almost invisible in the dim room. James followed it. The thread disappeared into a crack beneath the baseboard. He pulled gently. Somewhere behind the wall, something resisted. Then the thread snapped. James stood. "Not a ghost," he said. Edmund released a breath. "Thank God. Do not be too relieved. A ghost would be less troubling." Clara looked at him. "Someone is doing this?" "Yes." "Someone inside the lodge?" "Unless the mountain has learned stagecraft." "Yes." Mrs. Havel crossed herself. James turned to her. "This room has been opened before tonight." She looked away. "I did not open it. But someone with access to your keys did." Her hand went to the key ring. "No one has access." James looked at Edmund, then toward the stair, then down at the note in his hand. "Where is Dr. Reese?" The dining room was empty when they returned. His glass was on the table. His chair was pushed back. A trail of spilled wine led toward the library. James followed it. The library door stood half open. Inside, a fire burned low. Books lined 3 walls. A desk sat beneath the window, covered in old papers and a green-shaded lamp. Dr. Reese stood near the fireplace, holding a photograph. He looked up when James entered. "You should not have gone to the nursery," he said. "Why?" "Because whoever wrote that note wanted you to. You sound frightened." "I am old enough to know when fear is sensible." James stepped closer. "What is the photograph?" Dr. Reese hesitated, then handed it over. It showed 6 young people standing before the lodge in winter coats. Daniel Whitmere smiled at the center. Margaret Ellison stood beside him, one hand tucked into his arm. Arthur Crane stood slightly apart, handsome, proud, unsmiling. Peter Galloway held a camera. Simon Rowe wore a doctor's bag over one shoulder as a joke. Lillian Price looked away from the lens, as if listening to something outside the frame. James turned the photograph over. On the back, written in pencil, were the words, "Before the fall." James looked at Dr. Reese. "Who wrote this?" "I do not know." "Where did you find it?" "In that desk. Just now." "Why were you searching the desk?" Dr. Reese rubbed his forehead. "Because I heard music." Clara, standing at the door, whispered, "Music, piano," he said. Mrs. Havel stiffened. "Miss Lillian played piano that night." "What tune?" James asked Dr. Reese closed his eyes. "The same one." "The same as what?" "The one she played before they vanished." The library grew silent. Then from somewhere below them, faint but clear, came the sound of a piano. One note, then another. Then a slow, melancholy melody. No one moved. The sound came from the drawing room. James led the way. The drawing room was large, with heavy curtains, a cold fireplace, and a grand piano beneath a sheet. The sheet had been removed. The piano stood open. The keys moved by themselves. At least, that was how it looked for the first few seconds. The melody played softly, note after note, filling the room with a sadness so delicate that Clara began to cry before anyone spoke. James walked slowly to the piano. The keys continued moving. He crouched beneath the instrument and held the candle low. There, hidden beneath the keyboard, was a small clockwork device connected to the keys by thin metal rods. It had been wound recently and set to release at a certain time. James reached beneath and stopped it. The music died. Edmund laughed weakly. Another trick. James removed the device and placed it on top of the piano. Not a trick, a message, Doctor. Reese stared at it. Where did that come from? James looked at Mrs. Havel. Who in this house understands clockwork? She answered immediately. No one. Then she paused. Arthur did. Arthur Crane? Yes. He collected mechanical toys, automata, music boxes. He used to repair them in the workshop downstairs. James looked toward the corridor. There is a workshop? Behind the kitchen. It has been locked for years. Then let us unlock it. Mrs. Havel's hands trembled as she found the key. The workshop smelled of oil, dust, and old metal. It was a narrow room with a long bench against one wall. Tools hung from hooks. Small drawers held screws, springs, wires, and gears. Broken clocks sat in a row like patients waiting for a doctor who would never return. James set the clockwork device from the piano on the bench. Then he opened the drawers. In the third drawer he found matching wire. In the fourth, identical brass screws. In the fifth, pale candle wax. He looked at Clara. The devices used tonight were made here. By Arthur? Perhaps. Or by someone using his materials. He opened a cabinet. Inside were several wooden boxes, each labeled in neat handwriting. Window rig, piano release, nursery line, tower, light. Edmund whispered, Good Lord. James took down the box marked tower light. Inside was a brass fitting, a mirror, a candle holder, and a long coil of dark wire. The candle in the tower window had never needed a ghost, only a hidden mechanism. Clara gripped the edge of the workbench. Then the candle was false. The candle was real, James said. The haunting was false. Why would Arthur build all this? James looked at the labels, not for entertainment. Dr. Reese entered behind them slowly. He was always cruel. Everyone turned. The doctor stood in the doorway, pale. Arthur enjoyed frightening people. He liked making others feel uncertain. He called it theater. Mrs. Havel said softly. He called it justice. James looked at her. Justice for what? No one answered. Then a voice spoke from behind them. For Hannah Bell. Everyone turned. Edmund stood at the back of the room, his face white. Clara looked at him. Who is Hannah Bell? Edmund seemed to shrink beneath her gaze. A girl from the village. James stepped closer. Tell it carefully. Edmund's voice shook. She worked here one summer. In the kitchens. She was 16, maybe 17. Daniel and Arthur and the others were students then. They played a cruel joke on her. What kind of joke? Edmund swallowed. They wrote letters pretending to be from a boy she liked. They convinced her to come to the old mine path at night. They hid in the trees to frighten her. Clara said, No. Edmund looked at her helplessly. The joke went wrong. She ran. The path was icy. She fell into the ravine. Mrs. Havel closed her eyes. James spoke quietly. Did she die? Yes, Edmund said, but not immediately. The room seemed to become colder. She was found the next morning. Arthur's father paid the family. The police called it an accident. The students swore never to speak of it again. James looked at Clara. Her expression had changed completely. Grief had opened into something darker. My brother was part of it? Edmund could not look at her. Yes. She stepped back as if struck. Mrs. Havel said, Daniel regretted it. Clara turned on her. You knew? I was a servant here. I knew many things I was not allowed to say. And you said nothing? Mrs. Havel's voice broke for the first time. I had a son to feed and nowhere else to go. James allowed the silence to settle. Then he said, Daniel came early to ask Arthur to confess. Mrs. Havel nodded. He could not bear it anymore. He was going to marry Margaret. He told Arthur he would not begin a new life built on that silence. And Arthur refused. Yes. What happened the next night? Mrs. Havel looked toward the workshop shelves. Arthur prepared a game. A game? He told them it was a midnight challenge. A test of courage. They were to follow candles through the lodge, solve clues, and end at the old mine path. He said it would be amusing. He said they would finally face the place they had buried. Clara whispered, "Why would they agree?" "Because they were ashamed," James said, "and because Arthur knew how to command them." Mrs. Havel nodded. But the storm came. The clues led outside. They argued at the door. Daniel wanted to stop. Arthur insisted. Margaret followed Daniel. The others followed Margaret. They went out into the snow and never returned, Edmund said. James looked at him. "You were invited because Daniel wanted you as a witness." Edmund nodded. "I missed the train. I thought it was a small thing, one foolish delay. I did not know." Clara sat on a wooden stool and covered her face. No one spoke for a long time. The wind moved against the lodge. The fire in the kitchen beyond cracked softly. At last James said, "There is still a question." Dr. Reese looked at him. "Only one? Many. But one comes first." He held up the labeled box from the shelf. "These mechanisms have been maintained, polished, repaired, set for tonight." Arthur Crane vanished 10 years ago. Daniel vanished 10 years ago. The others vanished 10 years ago. So who has been lighting the candle every year? The workshop fell silent. Then, above them, somewhere in the ceiling, came a slow sound. Scrape, pause, scrape, pause, as if someone were dragging something across the floor upstairs. James looked at the ceiling. That is not clockwork. They climbed back to the main hall. The scraping came from above, moving across the upper gallery. James took the lantern from Clara. "Stay behind me." He reached the top of the stairs. The gallery was empty. Snow tapped softly against the windows. The scraping continued. It came from the far corridor, the north corridor, the corridor leading to the tower. James walked slowly. At the end of the hall, the tower door stood open. It had been closed before. Inside, the spiral staircase rose into darkness. A light glowed at the top. "Candlelight," Clara whispered. "It has begun." James climbed. At the top, the circular tower room was warm with golden light. A single candle burned in the brass holder on the windowsill. Beside it stood a figure in a heavy coat. For one breath, no one moved. Then the figure turned. It was a man. Older now, bearded, thin. His face had been changed by years of cold, hunger, and concealment. But Clara knew him. She knew him before her mind allowed it. "Daniel," she said. The man closed his eyes. James Vale watched carefully. The missing brother. The dead man. The ghost in the tower. Daniel Whitmere stood in the candlelight and looked at his sister as if waking from a long dream. "Clara," he said. She moved toward him, then stopped. No, you cannot be here. I am. You vanished." "Yes, you let me mourn you." Daniel flinched. "Yes." Clara's voice broke. 10 years. Daniel looked down. "I know." Edmund reached the top of the stairs and froze. Mrs. Havel began to weep quietly. Dr. Riss whispered, "Impossible." James did not say impossible. He disliked the word. Instead he asked, "Where have you been?" Daniel looked at him. "In the mountain." It was not the answer James expected. But he had learned not to interrupt the first true sentence a person gives. Daniel sat slowly on the bench beneath the east window. He looked exhausted, thinner than he should have been, but not mad, not entirely. "There are old service tunnels beneath the lodge," he said, "built by miners before the Crane family bought the land. Arthur knew them. He used them for his games. Hidden doors, sound shafts, passages between rooms." James nodded. "I suspected walls, not tunnels. They lead to the mine path and the ravine. That night, Arthur made us follow candles through the lodge. He wanted us frightened. He wanted us guilty. He wanted us to confess to one another." Clara stood very still. "Confess about Hannah Bell." Daniel closed his eyes. "Yes." "Did you kill her?" He opened his eyes. "No, but I helped lead her there, and I did not speak afterward. That is enough." She said nothing. Daniel continued. "We went outside. The storm was worse than Arthur expected. He insisted we continue to the old path. Peter wanted to turn back. Simon called Arthur insane. Lillian was crying. Margaret begged me to stop it. I tried." His voice thinned. "Arthur struck me. We fought. The lantern fell. Someone screamed. The snow shifted beneath the path. "The ravine," James said. Daniel nodded. "Arthur fell first. Peter tried to grab him and went after. Simon tried to reach them. The edge broke. Lillian slipped. Margaret screamed and ran toward me. I remember taking her hand. Then the snow gave way. Clara was pale. All of them? Not at once. Not cleanly. It was dark. The wind was terrible. I hit stone and blacked out. When I woke, I was below the path in a mining cut. Margaret was near me. She was alive. Clara's voice trembled. What happened? Daniel stared at the candle. We found an old tunnel entrance. It led under the lodge. We thought we could return from below. But part of the tunnel collapsed behind us. And the others? I do not know. I heard Peter for a while. Then I did not. Mrs. Havel covered her mouth. Daniel swallowed. Margaret was injured. I stayed with her. We found an old storeroom below, left from mining days. Food tins, oil, blankets. Enough for a few days. We thought someone would find us. No one did. James said. No. How did you survive? Daniel looked toward the floor. The tunnels connected farther than we knew. Eventually, I found a lower exit near the abandoned shepherd huts. By then, Margaret was dying. Clara whispered, Daniel. She made me promise not to return as Daniel Whitmere. Why? Because if I returned, I would have to tell the truth. Not just about that night. About Hannah. About Arthur. About all of us. Margaret said our families would bury it again, twist it again, pay people again. She said the mountain had kept the truth because we had not deserved it. Clara stared at him. So you obeyed. I was 24, injured, half-starved, ashamed, and terrified. I thought disappearing was punishment. I thought if the world believed I had died with them, it would be justice. That was not justice, Clara said. That was cruelty. Daniel lowered his head. Yes. James looked at the candle. You came back each year. Yes. Through the tunnels. Yes. You lit the candle. Yes. Why? Daniel looked at Clara. So someone would keep asking. James considered him. You wanted the truth discovered, but you did not want to speak it. Daniel's mouth tightened. I was a coward. Yes, James said gently. Clara looked at him, startled by the plainness. James continued. But cowards do not usually climb mountains every winter to light candles in windows. Daniel gave a broken smile. Perhaps I was a coward with habits. The wind shook the tower. The candle flame leaned, then steadied. Clara stood before her brother. Why tonight? Daniel looked toward the window. Because I am tired. Because the tunnels are collapsing. Because I saw your letter to Mr. Vale. You saw it? I watch the lodge when the anniversary comes. I saw you arrive in the village. I knew you were done being kept away from the truth. Clara's eyes filled. I spent 10 years thinking you were dead. I know. You let me stand at an empty grave. I know. You let our mother die believing she had lost her son. Daniel's face crumpled. That blow landed deepest. I came once, he whispered. To the cemetery. I stood beyond the wall. I saw her. I wanted to go to her. I could not. Clara slapped him. The sound cracked through the tower. No one moved. Daniel accepted it. Then Clara grabbed him and held him as if she meant to strike him again. But instead she began to cry into his coat. He stood rigid for a moment. Then slowly, as if he had forgotten how, he put his arms around his sister. Outside, the snow continued falling. James turned away and looked out the window. The candle burned beside him. From the valley below, anyone looking up would see the same mysterious flame that had haunted the mountain for 10 years. But now it did not look like a ghost light. It looked like a confession. They gathered in the main hall before dawn. Daniel sat near the fire wrapped in a blanket. Mrs. Havel brought hot tea. Edmund paced. Dr. Reese sat with his head in his hands. Clara stood by the mantel, quiet and pale. James listened as Daniel told the full account again, slowly and carefully. This time, without interruption. He described the old tunnels, the fall, the voices in the snow, Margaret's injury, the hidden storeroom, the lower exit, the years spent moving between villages under false names, the annual returns, the maintenance of Arthur's old mechanisms, the notes, the piano, the nursery, the tower candle. You frightened us, Clara said. Yes. Why write the note about Daniel coming early? Because you needed to know the beginning. And the piano? Lillian's tune. She played it that night. I wanted the house to remember all of them, not only me. Dr. Reese looked up. I searched for you. Daniel turned to him. I know. We all did. No, Daniel said quietly. You searched for bodies, not truth. The doctor looked away. James said, the tunnels must be shown to the authorities. Daniel nodded. Yes. And the ravine searched again. Yes. They may find remains. Daniel closed his eyes. I know. Clara asked, will you be arrested? James answered before Daniel could. Perhaps, but not for vanishing. For withholding knowledge, for false identity, perhaps for obstruction. Much depends on what the authorities decide. Daniel gave a faint laugh. I have lived in prison for 10 years. A real one may feel honest. Clara looked at him sharply. Do not make poetry of what you did. He lowered his eyes. No. A long silence followed. Then Mrs. Havel spoke. Hannibal should have a marker. Everyone turned. The old woman stood near the doorway, hands clasped. She had a wooden cross once. It rotted. Her parents left the village. No one speaks her name. James looked at Clara. She will have one, Daniel said. I will pay for it. No, Clara said. He looked at her. We all will. The first pale light of morning touched the windows. Outside, the storm had weakened. Snow still fell, but lightly now, as if the mountain had grown tired. James stood. Mr. Whitmere, show me the tunnel entrance. Daniel led him through the kitchen, past the workshop, and into a storage room behind stacked crates. There, beneath a rug, was a trapdoor. It opened with a groan. Cold air rose from below. James held a lantern over the opening. Stone steps descended into darkness. Arthur found it when we were students, Daniel said. He loved secrets. He loved having power no one else knew about. James began down the steps. The tunnel smelled of damp stone and earth. Wooden beams supported the ceiling. Some had cracked. Snowmelt dripped somewhere in the dark. They walked slowly. After 20 yards, the passage split. One way led upward. To the walls, Daniel said. Sound carries through grills. That is how the knocking worked. And the piano? Wires through the floor. And the tower candle. A small mirror and lighting system from the upper shaft. Arthur made most of it. I repaired it each year. James looked at him. You had skill. Arthur taught me, before I hated him, before I understood him. Perhaps those are not separate things, they continued. The tunnel opened at last into a low chamber filled with old mining crates. There were blankets, lanterns, tins, and a rusted stove. This is where you survived, James said, for a while. Daniel touched the wall. Margaret died there. James saw a pile of stones arranged neatly in the corner. A marker. On it lay a faded ribbon. She asked me to bring her home, Daniel said. I could not move her then. Later, I was afraid. James was quiet. The word afraid appeared often in human tragedy. It explained little, but it appeared everywhere. Daniel knelt by the stones. I told myself I was preserving the truth, but I think I was only preserving my punishment. James stood beside him. Punishment can become selfish when it prevents repair. Daniel looked up. My sister said something similar. She sounds wise. She was a child when I left. She is not a child now. They returned to the hall as the sun rose pale behind the storm clouds. Mr. Barlow arrived near noon, true to his word. He found Blackpine Lodge changed. Smoke rose from the chimneys. The front door stood open, and a man long believed dead sat on the steps, looking down the mountain as if seeing the world for the first time in years. The old driver crossed himself. James said, Mr. Barlow, we will need transport to the village, and then to the constable. Barlow looked at Daniel. Is that him? Yes. The dead brother? Yes. Barlow stared. Then he said, Mountain gives back strange things. James looked up at Blackpine Lodge. Sometimes people do. The next days passed with the careful pace of official truth. Constables came. Men with ropes searched the ravine. The tunnel was mapped. The remains of Margaret Ellison were recovered from the underground chamber and carried down the mountain with dignity. Far below the old mine path, beneath snow and stone, they found what remained of Arthur Crane, Peter Galloway, Simon Rowe, and Lillian Price. The mountain had not taken them. The mountain had kept them. There is a difference. Hannibal's story was told as well. Not loudly at first. Truth often enters a village like a nervous guest. It stands in doorways. It waits for people to decide whether to make room. But Clara made room. She paid for a proper stone in the churchyard, with Hannah's name clearly engraved. Hannah Bell, beloved daughter. wronged by silence, remembered at last. Daniel stood before that stone for a long time. No one asked what he said there. Some words belong only to the dead. In the weeks that followed, Blackpine Lodge was closed again. Not abandoned. Closed. There is a difference in that too. The windows were secured. The dangerous tunnel entrances were sealed. The old mechanisms were removed from the walls, the piano, and the tower. The brass candlestick remained. Clara insisted on it, but no candle was placed there again. Not for a long while. James Vale stayed in the village until the formal statements were complete. He wrote his own report in a small room above the inn, beside a window that looked toward the mountain. The report was factual. Names, dates, mechanisms, timelines, testimony, discovery of tunnels, recovery of remains, confession of Daniel Whitmere. But after the final page, in his private notebook, James wrote something else. Blackpine Lodge was never haunted by the dead. It was haunted by unfinished responsibility. There are houses where ghosts are only tricks. There are houses where tricks are only guilt wearing a mask. And there are places where a candle in a window is not meant to frighten the living, but to ask them to return. On the morning of his departure, Clara came to the inn. She wore a dark coat and carried a small parcel. "You are leaving," she said. "Yes." Without saying goodbye? "I dislike goodbyes before breakfast." She almost smiled. "I brought something for you." She gave him the parcel. Inside was a small brass gear from one of Arthur's mechanisms. James turned it over in his palm. A strange gift. A reminder. Of what? That even frightening things are sometimes made of small, ordinary parts. James closed his hand around it. That is a useful lesson. She looked toward the mountain. "Daniel has agreed to stand trial. I know. I do not know whether I forgive him. You do not need to know yet." "Do you think I will?" James considered. "Forgiveness is not a door that opens once. It is a path one walks or does not walk, one step at a time." Clara nodded. "I hate what he did. That may remain true, and I am glad he is alive. That may also remain true." She breathed out slowly. "People are difficult." "Yes," James said. "That is why mysteries exist." Clara gave a quiet laugh. For the first time since he had met her, the sound did not seem borrowed from grief. Outside, Mr. Barlow's carriage waited. The sky was bright but cold. The mountain rose above the village, white and silent. As James climbed into the carriage, Clara said, "Mr. Vale?" He turned. "Yes? Do you believe places remember?" He looked toward Blackpine Lodge, barely visible among the pines. "I believe people remember through places. And if no one remembers, then the place waits." The carriage began to move. James watched Clara grow smaller behind him. Then the road turned, and the village disappeared. As they climbed away from the valley road, Mr. Barlow glanced back. "Did you find your ghost?" James looked at the brass gear in his hand. "No. No, I found a brother, a lie, a tunnel, a candle, and a song played by a machine." Barlow grunted. "Sounds like a ghost to me." James smiled faintly. "Perhaps." The carriage rolled on through the winter morning. Snow lay thick along the branches. Sunlight touched the highest pines. The world looked clean in the way snow can make things look clean, even when the earth beneath is not. James thought of Daniel sitting by the fire, alive and ruined, but perhaps not beyond repair. He thought of Clara, who had come seeking a ghost and found a brother. He thought of Hannah Bell, whose name would no longer be carried only by the wind. He thought of Blackpine Lodge, empty again, but no longer silent in the same way. Some mysteries end with justice. Some end with grief. Some end with a door being opened after years of fear. And some end just before dawn, when a candle in a high window finally burns for the last time. Many years later, people in the village still spoke of Blackpine Lodge. They said it had once been haunted. They said a dead man had returned from the mountain. They said a candle had burned in the north tower every winter until the truth was found. Children loved that part of the story most. They imagined ghosts moving through the walls, secret staircases, hidden tunnels, and pale faces at frozen windows. Adults told the story differently. They spoke of young people who made a cruel mistake, then hid from it. They spoke of families who protected names instead of children. They spoke of a sister who climbed the mountain because grief had asked too many questions to remain polite. And sometimes, When snow began falling after sunset, someone in the village would look up toward the dark line of the pines and say that Blackpine Lodge was watching. But if you had asked James Vale, he would have said something else. He would have said that the lodge was listening to the wind move through sealed tunnels, listening to snow settle on the old roof, listening to the quiet places where laughter once lived, listening not for ghosts, but for truth, because truth, like a candle, does not always blaze. Sometimes it waits in a high window, small, steady, almost hidden, but visible to anyone willing to look up before dawn. And now, as the mountain grows still, as the snow falls softly over the dark pine forest, as the fireplaces of the village burn low and warm, we will leave Blackpine Lodge behind. The candle has gone out, the secret has been spoken, the storm has passed, and somewhere beyond the trees, morning has finally reached the mountain. So close your eyes now. Let the snow fall quietly in your imagination. Let the fire glow softly beside you. Let the old lodge fade into peaceful distance. And remember that not every mystery comes to frighten us. Some arrive to be understood. Some arrive to be forgiven. And some arrive only when the night is almost over, just before the first pale light of dawn. These are the stories that tuck you in.